Okay, can you hear me? Yes, obviously you can. Okay, so today we shall speak a bit about the language and the culture and the music, with some emphasis on the music. So, before we start, I should say that while in Spain, the Sephardic Jews used all the instruments that were typical of Spanish music. Now, Spanish music, as we have learned by now after 10 days here, there is Andalusian music, and then there is Christian Spanish music, right? So obviously the Jews of Andalusia used the instruments which were there, which were popular there, and the Jews of Christian Spain, those instruments which were popular there. But just like it usually happens with music and other less religion-related aspects of culture, musical instruments passed the frontiers much better and much easier than other things and concepts. So you would have troubadours, right, going from one court to another, and then Muslim kings imitating Christian kings, and Christian kings imitating Muslim kings, and everybody just needed to have the best known artists and so on. For today, for example, you saw a castle of a Christian king, which was done according to the best knowledge of Islamic architecture. And why? Because this was the thing that rich people had to have, right? So there was competition, and it was a healthy competition, and people were copying each other, and the courts were copying each other, and the things which were better would pass from one side of Spain to another. And so this was also happening with the music. So you could, for example, see, this is also very interesting. One of the first people in the world to use Spanish for written poetry was a Jew, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, and some other people functioning in southern Spain, in this part. How did this came to happen? There is, in Arabic poetry, there is such a thing as harja, right? Now, harja is different than the rest of the song. You could call it an English refrain or something like that, right? So the Jewish writers introduced to Judeo-Arabic poetry harjas written in Spanish, right? They would write a stropha in Judeo-Arabic, and then they would write harja in Spanish. Now, Spanish elite at the moment didn't write Spanish at all, because for them there was no such a thing as Spanish. For them, there was Latin, and there was spoken Latin. And you don't write in spoken Latin. When we are speaking of 11th, 12th, 13th century, there is no still concept of Spanish, right? People who know how to write, they write in Latin. And then the language that they are speaking is just spoiled Latin, popular Latin, vernacular Latin. That's why our own Jewish language is called Ladino, right? Which is related to Latino, okay? The word is related to word Latino. But let's concentrate today a bit more on music and less on history. So first I would like to introduce some genre, so that you should know which genres were typical of Spain. So if you are concentrating on Christian Spain, you would have baladas and romanzas, which are both basically kind of epic lyric poetry. Then here in Spain you would have complas or coplas, which in Spanish had to do more with the form than with the content, right? So copla in Spanish would refer to the form of a song rather than to its content. When here Jews took active part in absorbing, preserving, and creating in both these genres. What is peculiar about the development of Sephardic Judaism after the expulsion is that romanzas became exclusively female and complas became exclusively male. Now this doesn't mean that males didn't know romanzas, because every male had a mother, and the mothers used these complas to put their children to sleep. Romanza would be called, in English would be called chivalry song. So these are songs about knights and princesses and kings and queens and so on. I'll give you one example, and you will understand better the information I gave you on one of previous lectures, that rabbis were very against the romanzas until the romanzas started dying. Right? You remember that? So I'll give you one romanza. The queen is preparing her hair. The king comes, and in order to play with her, right, para burlarse con ella, that's what the song says, he touches her back with his scepter. She thinks this is her lover. She says, Anderletto, mi pulido enamorado. Now I'm sorry, but I have to translate it to English just the way it is. Anderletto, my endowed lover. Mas te quiero y mas te amo que el rey con su reinado. I love you better than the king with his kingdom. Dos hijos de ti tengo y dos del rey que son cuatro. I have two sons by you, and two sons by king, which are four. Los del rey se van a la guerra y los tuyos a mi lado. Those of the king, I've sent them to war, and those of yours, they're always with me. Then she turns to her lover, and she sees it's her husband. Yeah, but you know, she's Spanish. So she says, how do you like the dream that I just had? Now the king, you know, he didn't like the idea of losing the queen, but he also didn't like the idea of her having the lover, so to be on the safe side, he killed the lover. Yeah, he killed the lover. There are some versions in which he killed them both. There is no happy end version in which nobody gets killed. Right. So in any case, you can see that these were not really Jewish values. And when the rabbis screamed against these songs, they used to say, these foreign songs in foreign language, which are full of vanity and stupidity, and if not, then of fornication and prostitution. Why you are singing them? Are these the values that you want to pass on to your children? However, though, I would like to argue that one of the reasons why Sephardim are the way they are has to do with the secular culture, secular Spanish culture, which was perpetuated by Sephardic Jewish women. Everybody was exposed to this aspect of the culture, and I believe that this is what somehow made Sephardic rabbis more lenient or more real-life related or more realistic or more pragmatic. I'll give you one example, beautiful one in my eyes. You know how according to Jewish halakha you are supposed to check the food which might have worms. So cherries, you can't eat cherries without opening them. You can't eat figs, according to Jewish law, without opening them. Now there is a guy in Salonika in 17th century. He finds a worm in kind of fruit that usually doesn't have worms. I can't remember right now which one it is, but let's say banana, okay? Something like that, you know, never in recorded human history there was a worm in such a fruit. However, this guy, he is unlucky enough to find one. So he goes to the rabbis of Salonika and he tells them, I found the worm. You should warn the community. From now on, everybody should check bananas, you know, because there might be worms in there. I found one. Now, if this was in an Ashkenazi community, it might happen, right? That some people would check, and some rabbis would say you have to check, and some rabbis would say you have to refrain at all, and others would say there is no Jewish tradition concerning bananas, so if you are a tzaddik and so on, you should better refrain and whatever. Now look at this. This is Sephardic tradition. The rabbis tell him like this: there were never worms in bananas. We don't know what happened in your particular case, but you can just eat bananas, go home. Don't go bananas. So the guy doesn't like the idea. So he writes to Hida, Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azulai in Jerusalem. So he writes to him and he says, woe to the generation that such a thing should pass during its time. That guardians of Torah should sleep during their shift. I told the rabbis of Salonika that I found a worm in banana, and instead of obliging everybody to check, they just told me that usually there are no worms in these fruits. Now listen carefully to the Sephardic response. Rabbi tells him like this, from Jerusalem. He tells him like this. Before you checked with Bet Din, it was all right for you to check bananas, even though there is no need for that. Once you asked the Bet Din, the rabbinical court, and they told you that there is no need to check, not only you are not allowed to tell others to check, but you are not allowed to check for yourself. And if you check for yourself, even without telling others to check, you will be found guilty of three things. First, mevazeh divrei chachamim, making fun of the words of the sages. Right? You asked the rabbis told you not to, you think you are smarter than the rabbis. Okay. Second thing, poresh midarkei tzibur, leaving the ways of the community. The entire community goes one way, you go another way. And then the third thing was, let me remember, poresh midarkei tzibur, motzi laz ala rishonim. Being disrespectful of previous generations. Because previous generations didn't check bananas. Now you are checking bananas, you are saying that we are better. So you are better than Moshe? Moshe never checked bananas. So you are better than Moshe? Now look at this. The rabbi says like this. And any person that does one of those three, let alone all three of them, doesn't have part in the world to come. Unlike the person who eats worms directly and not within a cherry or a fig. If you take worms because you like worms and you eat worms directly, not you forgot to check your cherry or you forgot to check your fig, it's lesser a sin than undermining the rabbis, undermining the community, and undermining the previous generation. So I think this is a beautiful example of Sephardic approach to halakha. You all know how in American Judaism, Jews are divided into Orthodox and Conservative and Reform and so on. Let me tell you how does this look from Sephardic perspective. When I was a kid, a group of Israelis came to my community. The secretary of the community takes them to the community and shows them around. For half an hour they are speaking to her, she's speaking to them, everybody is speaking to everybody. It's more than obvious that this is a group of Jews from Israel that came to Jewish community. Still though, at the moment when they ask her, is this an Orthodox community? She says, oh no, this is a Jewish community. Orthodox Church is across the street. Because where I come from, Orthodox is totally Christian term. It never had anything to do with the Jews. There are Russian Orthodox, Serbian Orthodox, Bulgarian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox. Armenian are not really Orthodox, they are monophysite, but okay, you can say Armenian Orthodox. You can't be Jewish Orthodox. Why? Because that would mean Jewish Christian Orthodox. And if it's already Christian Orthodox, how can it be Jewish? Another example was during the Civil War. I was already in Israel, I left before the war. But during the Civil War in 1993, there was a ceasefire. I'm coming to Sarajevo, and there is this nice woman in the community, and she hugs me, so she leaves, and I say to one of the old guys, I tell him, I don't even know who she is. And he goes, of course you don't know, she's conservative. And I'm like, she's what? And he says, oh, you don't know. Well, when the war started, the community started distributing conserves. how do you call them in English? You know, the preserved food? So it's called, in Serbian, it's called konzerva, right? So conservative Jews are Jews who were unaffiliated previously, but they started coming to the community when community started distributing food. So that's conservative. And reform is kind of cake, not a kind of kike, but a kind of cake, right? So we don't have Orthodox, conservative, reform. However, though, Jews must be divided. So there is a question: how were traditional Sephardic Jews divided, if not into Orthodox, conservative, reform, and so on? Well, they say like this: believers and observant, believers and inshallah observant, and inshallah believers. Inshallah means God's willing in Arabic. So that would mean believers and observant, believers and God's willing observant. You know, right now they are not, but God's willing one day. And then the third and the last group are God's willing believers. I mean, right now they don't believe, but you know, down the road, one day they will. Now, komplas, as I said, I'm returning to Jewish music. Komplas were only in Jewish tradition. Komplas became totally religious genre. So in Spain, you can have a moralistic kompla, and you can have a religious kompla, and you can have a lyric kompla. In Sephardic tradition, no. In Sephardic tradition, you can have only religious kompla, and these were male songs in Judeo-Spanish. So basically, they were like piutim in Ladino. Because the subjects that they treat are always religious subjects. They can be related to the cycle of the year, they can be related to cycle of life, they can be related to biblical personalities or to biblical events, but they are always religious. And unlike that, you had romanzas. Now, as far as the komplas are concerned, you would have like a certain guy that would write a kompla, you know, a few weeks later or a few years later it would become a popular song and nobody remembered anymore who created it. So that's what's called, right, folk song and so on. But on the other side you would have a very elaborated high-level Britain, not only komplas as individual songs. Actually, I'll ask you a question. What do you think when the first Jewish musical was written? The first, I mean, come on, you are a nation of Broadway. When the first Jewish musical was written? And in which language and by whom? I beg your pardon? Musical, we are talking about musical. So you need, right, you need music and you need drama, right? Real musical with instrumental music, with high instrumental music, it's called Komplas de Yosef HaTzadik. It was written by Rabbi Abraham Toledo. Komplas de Yosef HaTzadik. Compilations about Joseph the Just, right? Yosef HaTzadik. This is a huge piece for which there is Ottoman court music with representation of biblical drama in Judeo-Spanish. Now this is really one of the masterpieces of Ladino literature, and it's such a shame that because of the Holocaust and Hitler and everything that happened, this totally died. And I would like, after hearing yesterday to that beautiful prayer, and after seeing what the cantors can do when they want, I started to think since yesterday, maybe just the way the American Judaism took the flag of European Judaism in many different fields, maybe it should also take upon itself to revive all kinds of Sephardic masterpieces which are today totally forgotten. This could be translated to English. 17th century. But it's musical, it's real musical, with chord music, with high music, right? You can find the text translated to Hebrew. Obviously the text in original is in Judeo-Spanish. It's a beautiful text. And what the guy does the rabbi, he doesn't only tell the story, because everybody knows the story, so it's boring. So just like Hollywood, he needs to make a twist in the story. So in his musical, many a time, something that's biblical lacuna, that in Bible there is only one single verse, he develops it into something big. So for example, when Jacob learns about how Joseph died, he believes he did, he believes he died. So the Bible says, "Vayavo'u kol banav uvnotav lenachamo." And all his sons and all his daughters came to console him. Daughters? He had only one, Dinah. So the rabbis in that place are saying his daughters and his daughters-in-law, which are as his daughters. Right? Now, that's the end of the story. We don't know what the sons told him. We don't know what the daughter told him. We don't know what the daughters-in-law told him. But this rabbi introduces all of them. And every and each of daughters-in-law comes in, and she says a word, and she brings kind of food. And she's trying to console her father-in-law. But what's beautiful is their names. He just invents their names. So, la mujer de Yehuda, Leona. Judah's wife, called Leona, comes in. Now, why would you call Judah's wife Leona? And was this guy stupid? Did he really think that Judah, 4,000 years ago, could have a wife with Spanish name? Of course not. But this is like exactly what he's doing. He is breaking the horizon of expectations of his viewers, right? And then he introduces something that makes them laugh, and then he introduces something that makes them cry, right? But he is not a tape recorder. He doesn't just bring the old story to the stage. So each of the ladies have a name. Out of 10 ladies, 8 have Spanish names. And only 2 have Hebrew names. La mujer de Gad, the wife of God, is called Mazalta, right? Which is like Mazal Tov, which is God. God in Hebrew means Mazal. And then Mazal Tov is the same thing. And then the wife of Issachar is called Kevuda, the honorable one. And all rest of them have Spanish names, like the wife of Dan is called Justa. Why? Because Dan in Hebrew means a judge. So judge should do justice. So his wife is called Justa. But then the wife of Levi, for example, is called Estrella, the star. Now why would you call her a star? Because on his shield he had a star. So sometimes the female's name has to do with husband's name. Sometimes it has to do with another pasuk, just like in the case of Yehuda. The pasuk says, Gur Aryeh Yehuda. The child of a lion is Judah. So lion, that's why you always have in Ashkenazi tradition also people called Yehuda Aryeh, right? Because Aryeh became also the sign of Judah. Now this reflects the thing that this guy already in 17th century gives to 8 women out of 10 Spanish names. This reflects the Sephardic tradition. The males who were called up to Torah, they all needed to have Hebrew names. So most of the males, 95 if not 99% of Sephardic males would have a Hebrew name. Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, David, Shlomo, but they would have Hebrew names. Ladies were not called up in Torah, so they didn't need to have a Hebrew name. However, though, in Sephardic tradition, and then those of you who are coming from Sephardic tradition can check me, unlike the Ashkenazim, Sephardim do name after the living, which means you couldn't be creative with the names. The first male child is called after father's father. The second male child is called after mother's father. The first female child is called after father's mother. And then the second female child is called after mother's mother. And then with the 5th child you can be creative. You've done enough, you can be creative. Now, what happens? Imagine this. Let's say, oh, you know what? Instead of imagining, I'll just give you illustration from the real life. At Ben Gurion University, we are trying to establish this institute for Sephardic culture. We have a center. We want to convert it into something bigger. So obviously, I needed to come to America for money raising, and I was accompanied by a nice Jewish Ashkenazi lady from AABGU, from American Associates of BGU, and we went to Seattle. In Seattle, there are 2 Jewish communities, Sephardic and 1 Ashkenazi, so altogether 3. The 2 Sephardic communities are in a state of civil war since they were established, right? One is from Rhodos, and another is from Turkey. So we were invited to the house, me and the lady from AABGU, American Associates of Ben Gurion, we were invited to the house of the Chazan of the Turkish synagogue. And he is called Frank Varon. Frank Varon. So, you know, they speak and everybody speaks. And at one certain point he says, and as the firstborn, so I understood he was the firstborn in his family, which means he had to be named after his father's father. Now there is no way that his father's father in Turkey was called Frank. So okay, so I put 2 and 2, 4, and I tell him, so your grandfather was Ephraim, right? And he says, of course, and proceeds speaking. But then this lady from ABGU says, you knew his grandfather? And I'm like, how could I know his grandfather from Turkey 100 years ago? So she says, how did you know he was Ephraim? And then this guy says, well, all Franks are Ephraim. Because all Franks in his life are Ephraim. And why is this so? Let's say that this guy, Frank, Ephraim, who moved from Turkey to United States, to Seattle. Let's say that he had 3 sons and 3 daughters. Each of his sons had a firstborn son who was called Frank, after the grandfather. And each of the daughters had a second-born son who was called Frank. Now imagine a family lunch. Imagine a family lunch. You have Frank and 6 small Franks. Now, so I'm trying to explain to this lady from ABGU, I'm trying to explain her, how does this go? And then the wife of the Chazan says, that's why I'm called Rina, after my grandma Esther. Beautiful, isn't it? That's why I'm called Rina, after my grandmother Esther. So the lady from ABGU tells her, but Rina is Hebrew name. And Rina says, oh, is it? No, what's going on? Well, what's going on is very easy. If there were 6 cousins and each of them is called Esther, only the first one is really Esther. But you cannot afford to have 6 cousins and each one of them is Esther. So Esther, Esterina, Rina. Esterucha, Rucha. Esterlulu, Lulu. Right. So basically, each of them would have her grandma's name and a nickname derived from it, but in a very creative way. Because you would never think that the person called Lulu is Esther, right? Unless you are Sephardic, and then it's obvious, Esther Lulu. Right? And then you would never think that Rina, which sounds like totally Hebrew name, is basically abbreviation of Esther. Okay, so back to our subject. There is a lady in Sarajevo. There was a lady in Sarajevo called Laura Papo Bohoreta. Now, don't look at me. She's not really Papo. She was Levi. She just got married to somebody called Papo. And besides that, Papo in Sarajevo is just like Johnson in America. If you ever meet a Jew from Sarajevo and he's not Papo, and his mother is not Papo, and neither of his 2 grandmothers is Papo, he's not from Sarajevo. Just forget it. There were 268 households of Papos in Sarajevo before the Second World War, right? So this was like normal name. Anyhow, she was the first lady from Sarajevo who got Western education. So she could also write, because up till that moment, most of the ladies were illiterate. So their tradition was oral tradition, right? So this lady writes a book, and the book is called La Mujer Sephardi de Bosna, Sephardic Woman of Bosnia. And Bosnia, Sephardic Woman of Bosnia. Now, if you were a male, you would never have, if you were a male writing this monography, right, you would probably have same number of chapters, but most of the chapters wouldn't be the same. I'll give you an example. She has first chapter, La Chiquez, the childhood. Okay, anybody would start there. Any woman was first a girl. Second chapter, Maridanza, marriage. Third chapter, La Suegra, mother-in-law. Now, no male would write a chapter about mother-in-law. But for Sephardic woman, mother-in-law was much more important than the husband. And this is because she was actually married to her mother-in-law. Why? Because her husband would be home only when todos los gatos son pretos, when all the cats are black, during the night. There is a Sephardic female wisdom which says, bendicho que ausó el marido al charshi y los hijos al rubí. Blessed be God who organized his world in such a way that husbands are always working and kids are always in school. Right? So she is the queen of the house. But then, she was not the only queen of the house, because there were other ladies. So, the face that she was looking at 724 was not her husband's face. It was her mother-in-law. So it was much more important who was your mother-in-law than who was your husband. He would come only in the evening. Now, how did this wisdom that I just said came into effect, that ladies themselves should say, well, blessed be God who created the world in such a way that husbands are working and children are in school? That's a very Jewish thing. You know, like you have Zen Buddhism and then you have Zen Judaism. What's Zen Judaism? That's when you can't change the reality, but then you start convincing yourself that it's great. That's called converting defect into effect. And Jews are just great in it. So the ladies over here, they had a major defect because they were, not allowed to go to public space too much. So they decided to convert this defect into effect by saying, well, who needs to be there? The most important thing is, we are here on our own, we can do whatever we want. There is another saying which says, mujer honrada, pacha quebrada. Woman of honor, a broken leg. What does that mean? Well, a woman of honor acts as if her leg was broken, so she can't really go out a lot, right? So this is the Judeo-Spanish way of saying, kol batamelech, right? And so on. You know the Hebrew saying which says, the princess, the daughter of the king, entire her beauty is inside, not on the outside. So, I'm going back to the chapters. This lady is writing about holidays. Now, any male writing about holidays, in the name of the woman, would do what males always do, right? He would start with Shabbat, switch to Shalosh Regalim, and he would switch to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Or, start with Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, switch to Shalosh Regalim, and go to Shabbat. For her, however, the trickiest part of this chapter is Rosh Chodesh. Now, why is that so? Because in Sephardic tradition, on Rosh Chodesh, you cannot do anything unless it is related to financial loss. So, all the works which, if you don't do them on Rosh Chodesh, you will suffer a financial loss, you can do them on Rosh Chodesh. That means that men could open their shops. Because if they were not to open their shops, they would suffer a financial loss. Now, ladies couldn't cook, because there was no financial loss if you don't cook on Rosh Chodesh. So they need to cook the day before. The ladies couldn't do any of the traditional female jobs, because none of them was related to financial loss. So this means that they basically had how many Rosh Chodeshim we have in the year? 18. Because 18, because 6 of them are 1 day, 6 of them are 2 days. So ladies actually, imagine that. Ladies actually had 18 days guaranteed holidays throughout the year. Right? 18 days that they couldn't do anything. So if you can't do anything, they would dress and they would go and visit each other. Right? Okay. Yeah. Yes, please. They would have. Yes. Of course. I'm not saying anything that isn't. Right? So this tradition was not something that it wasn't. But there was 18 unworking days for females. And this was basically very just. When you think that on holidays, men didn't work really, but women did, because somebody needed to put all the food on the table and to remove it from the table. And in traditional community in the Ottoman Empire, these certainly were not men. Now this is, okay, so guys, don't throw anything at me. She has a beautiful chapter, which is last chapter of her book. It's called Widowhood. Widowhood. Now, would you imagine any man writing a book about women, having a chapter called Widowhood? Of course not. We don't want to die. But this lady, she was writing from female perspective. It was obvious that being the fact that there was 15 years gap, at least, amongst the husband and the wife. And why is that so? Because on one side, the traditional community wanted the husband to be able to take care financially, economically, about the family. And on the other side, they wanted them to have many kids. So he was 30, she was 16. 17. If she was 18, her parents were saying like, oh, it's such a pity we don't have nuns. I mean, 18 was late. Because, why? Because in next 20 years, they would like to have 10 kids. Right? That's traditional family. So it was obvious for this female author that husbands die and females proceed. Now this is so living a tradition that a few years ago I was visiting the community of Split on the seaside in Croatia, and one old woman enters and she says to one of the younger guys, she says, could you please switch to another program, I want to see the news. And he says, oh, you are just like my wife, she doesn't know how to switch either. And she says, oh, don't you worry, when you die she will learn. Now, she wasn't trying to be sarcastic, she wasn't trying to be cynical, she was just reflecting her experience, her life experience, right? And her life experience is that you really have to learn how to switch programs when your husband died. Before that, he wouldn't even let you have the thing in your hands. Okay, so, I'm thinking maybe I should introduce also, if we already touched, well, you know what, first before that, there is another beautiful chapter in her book, which you will probably be shocked to hear about, but then when you reflect on it, we might learn to take something from it. There was a beautiful Sephardic minhag called La Murtaja. La Murtaja. What's La Murtaja? This is preparation of the stuff in which a person will be buried during the lifetime. So, when somebody would reach certain age, they would make a festive occasion. Just like Berit Milah, just like Zeved Habat, just like Bar Mitzvah, just like Bat Mitzvah, just like wedding, they would have a festive occasion. Entire family, which means 10 Franks and 10 Esthers, and they would all come in, right? And a lot of singing, a lot of dancing, a lot of this and a lot of that. And then at the peak of the evening, they would put the cloth on the floor, and then the grandma or the grandpa would lie, and they would take his or her measures. Now you might think that this is totally cruel, right? You like, wow! But I want to put it into context. A few months ago, a student of mine comes to me and she says, I came to you, of course, because my grandfather passed away. He was from Salonika, and I always wanted, you know, to record him and whatever, but I never had a chance, and he died. Okay, so I was thinking, well, he died 58 in car accident. So I say, how old was your grandfather? And she says, 95. So I say, it never occurred to you that, you know, he might die one day? And she says, oh, you don't know my grandfather, he was always in jeans. Now, jeans, you can't die if you wear jeans, right? Because you are young. This nice Israeli way of, you know, jeans metaphor. But in any case, the thing is that today in our modern culture, we are so afraid of that we don't speak of it. And we neglect it. And we act as it never existed. And we deprive ourselves of community leading you towards that stage in your life, which brings after we don't know what, but, you know, we would like to believe that there is some continuation after it. But the beautiful thing is that the same way the community welcomes you when you come to this world, and the same way the community says, well, now we recognize you as a woman, or we recognize you as a man. The same way the community tells you, now we recognize you as a family. That same way the community says, now we recognize you as an elder. And we want you to act as an elder. And after this ceremony, if the man before that would spend 10 hours a day in his shop, like, you know, working from 10 to 8 or something, now he would go from 12 to 2. And then at 2 he would come back home to take siesta because his son took over. Right? And everybody, they would just enter a different speed in their life. And everybody was more conscious about the fact that there are now only 10 or 20 additional years that grandpa or grandma will be here. Now, I'm not saying we should all start having clothes on the floor and taking measures, but I'm saying that we should reflect on this beautiful minhag, or this beautiful custom, and learn something about the need of our communities to address something that we all eventually will meet, and we go there totally on our own, which is freaking, because we are forbidden to think and we are forbidden to speak about it, right? So we neglect it. So let's learn. We have it there. You know what? I want to tell you something. Many a time people ask me, who really cares, you know? I mean, there are 200,000 Sephardim in Israel today. Everybody else is either Ashkenazi or Oriental, so you guys should just decide. Either you are Ashkenazim or you are Oriental, or you know what? Convert to Islam. Right? Why would anybody care about this? Well, there are reasons. There are many reasons. One of the reasons is, first of all, shouldn't we fight back Hitler? Or we should just agree with him that he was successful in exterminating this Jewish tradition. That's one reason, which for me is reason enough. But then, Spanish is becoming second language in United States, soon to become first. The same way, and you can remember, we talked about this in one of previous lectures, the same way the secular leadership of the Sephardic Jews imported Ashkenazi rabbis to help them cultivate Judaism or offer interpretation of Judaism which was more fitting into European context, because Sephardic rabbis brought up in Judeo-Islamic tradition were not capable of delivering. Well, maybe there is a lot that modern American Jewry can take from Sephardic experience and from this raised Judeo-Spanish literature, and instead of inventing and reinventing, why shouldn't we just use things that are there? Your children, if not your children, your grandchildren will speak Spanish. So why shouldn't they have at their disposal raised literature already translated into Spanish by the best of our rabbis? Why invent it all from the scratch? It's all there. It just screams out to Jews, you know, take me. And then the third reason would be the Sephardic Jews are the only Jews in the world who are equally comfortable in both traditions, in Islam and in Christianity. And why is that so? They lived in Islamic Spain, then they lived in Christian Spain, then they were kicked from Christian Spain, they went to Islamic Ottoman Empire. Then in Islamic Ottoman Empire there were insurrections, revolutions, and then Christian states were created, Greece and Bulgaria and Serbia and so on. And Sephardim lived in each of those. So they developed both cultural affiliation for both things. So Sephardic Jew can listen to Turkish music and then switch to Mozart, and for him this is totally normal, and he can equally, take pleasure in both. And even more importantly, they developed ways of dealing with Islam. I'm sorry for saying this, but I need to say it because that's how academy functions. You always say what you think. The Ashkenazim have a major problem when dealing with Arabs because they don't know Arabs. So some Ashkenazim imagine them bad. That's like Bibi Netanyahu a few weeks ago, saying that Holocaust was Hitler's idea. Holocaust was Haji Emin Effendi al-Husseini's idea. The Mufti of Jerusalem, he told Hitler, burn the Jews. I want to be just to him. Bibi actually said that when Mufti and Hitler met, Mufti told Hitler, don't let Jews leave Europe, because each Jew you leave, he comes to Palestine to us. So Hitler says, well, what will I do with them? And then, according to Bibi, Mufti told him, burn them. Come on. Mufti was a war criminal, but Hitler would burn us without him. So, on one side, there are those who demonize the Arabs. And on another side are those who see them. You know, there is a Ashkenazi type called Lawrence of Araby. These are all these nice and beautiful left-wing extremists who really function as Lawrence of Araby, and then they imagine, you know, these Arabs that were whatever. So neither of the two is true. Arabs are not Hitler. Arabs are not ideal creatures from desert who were exposed to injustice when the Zionists came to their country, right? Arabs are just normal Arabs, and Sephardim knew how to live with them. I think Israel can learn a lot from Sephardic experience. America can learn a lot from Sephardic experience, and I would also like if the Cantor Assembly would really consider this possibility of reviving Jewish musical, the story of Joseph, with the court music. Whether you translate it to English, whether you do it partly in English, partly in Hebrew, partly in Judeo-Spanish, but it would be a beautiful thing to re-establish 17th century Jewish musical. So, here I will end my today's presentation, but I'm more than ready to take questions if you have them, or coffee if you don't. Harja. Harja would be the part of the song which doesn't follow the same rhyme and same metrics. So Yehuda Halevi, for example, in order to make a striking difference between the strophas and this part, which could correspond to modern English term refrain, right? How do you call that part which you repeat? Refrain. Yeah, refrain, right? So Harja would be some kind of Arabic/Judeo-Arabic refrain. So they made it in a different, structurally, formally, in a different way. So Yehuda Halevi would write it in Spanish. When you know Spanish guy would write it in Spanish, because why? Because Spanish was the language of the poor. It was the language of the people. And if you write in Latin. Now Jews didn't write in Latin because it was church language. Right? So there was almost no Jewish intellectual who would write in Latin because it was considered to be the language of the church.
My second question, a lot of us here in America, especially the Ashkenazim, our first exposure...
Here in America.
Most of us who grew up in America and who were Ashkenazim, our first exposure to Sephardic or Ladino music, I should say Ladino music, are songs like Cuando el Rain Road and Escalarica de Oro, and first I thought that they were very old, from school, they were very old folk songs, then I was told that they were only about 100 years old. Do you know?
Yes. Well, romanzas are very old, and they are from 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th century. And Sephardim, the text, and being the fact that melodies are, basically you have 5 to 6 modes of singing romanzas, so these 5 or 6 modes were kept. Here and there the vocabulary was a bit touched. Traditional Ottoman refrains were introduced, like aman, 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 or something like that. But musically and textually, romanza was a medieval Spanish text. Unlike that, love songs don't tend to survive few decades or few centuries. Why? Because in the love culture, things change. And they change a lot. And they change. What you are saying? Lyric songs. Lyric songs like the Escalarica de Oro or that kind of stuff, right? Noches, noches. No, noches, noches. Whatever. It might be a part of a romanza. But think like Adio Querida. Right? Adio Querida is obviously a love song. Now, yes, so most of the love songs are not medieval. Some of them are old. Majority of them are only 100 or 150 years old. Many of them taken from Argentinian movies or from Greek culture or from Turkish culture. They would take the melody and they would put to it a different text. Or they would even take the melody and the text and translate the text into Judo-Spanish. Right? So the love songs, the culture of the love songs was much more influenced by the context, by the local culture, and they were borrowing entire texts with their melodies from the surrounding cultures. But in romanzas, this was something typically Jewish. Only Jews did that, and they did that for 400 years. Yes, please.
Okay, so on a different level, is this true, that the young lady Papa did marry the mother-in-law because it was the mother-in-law who scouted out the potential bride at the mikveh?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Actually, in many communities, the mikveh was, yes, you need to go, I know, it's finished. This is informal part. So, in many communities, the mikveh was basically part of the Turkish bath. It was part of hammam, right? There was a mikveh in the hammam. So the ladies would go there, and then the mothers would look for a bride for their son. And they were looking for biological attributes, which meant that she's healthy and she can have many children. So they wouldn't only check her, they would check her mother and her grandmother and all her relatives.